My name is Kate Steyer, and I'm the Alumni Affairs Manager at SVA. Again, very excited to present our discussion tonight. Let's talk visual art and activism. Tonight, our panelists will discuss how they see their work in relation to activism and the role that art and design play in bringing about social and political change. We invite you to join us on social media tonight. We'll be doing some posts on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, so if you have any thoughts about what's being said, please feel free to share, and you can use our hashtags down there too. So also as a reminder, for all of our alumni and students out there tonight, we are having a reception in the lobby after the discussion, so you're welcome to join us for that. You can exit to the right, I think that's your right, this one right here, and then everyone else will have to, we just ask that you exit through the left side and out the side doors. So can you not see them? So sure, it's hashtag SVA alumni and hashtag let's talk. So pretty straightforward. But if you just want to tag our handles in your post, that works too. All right, so without further ado, I will introduce you to our panelists. Marlena Buczek-Smith moved to the US from Poland in the early 90s to study graphic design at SVA, where she earned her BFA in 2002. Marlena's body of work includes posters, commercial graphic design, and paintings. Her posters have been printed in various publications and have been exhibited globally in countries including the US, Germany, China, Poland, and Russia. Kat Del Buono received her MFA in photography, video, and related media in 2008. She creates video installations and public happenings that focus on social issues. Her works have shown in the US and abroad, including the Bronx Museum, Chashama NYC, and MoCA Miami. Awards include the Bronx Museum AIM program and an ISC Cultural Foundation grant. She has lectured on the topic of women in the media and was an artist in residence at Art Center South Florida and Gallery Le Pen in Barcelona. Delano Dunn received his MFA in Fine Arts in 2016. Through painting, mixed media, and collage, he explores questions of racial identity and perception through various contexts, ranging from the personal to the political, and drawing from his experience growing up in South Central LA. He has had solo exhibitions in LA and New York, and group exhibitions in Newark and Miami. He is currently an invited artist in residence at Project for Empty Space in Newark, and his solo exhibition, No One Can Be This Tomorrow, is now on view at Long Gallery in Harlem. Bruno Silva earned his BFA in graphic design in 2007 and his MFA in design for social innovation in 2016. He currently serves as a lead experience and product designer at the Arnold Institute for Global Health at Mount Sinai Health System. In this role, he researches user needs, design services, and product innovations that are user-centric for the improvement of population health and health systems design. Silva is passionate about technology and the role it can play to affect social change. His goal is to ensure that innovation benefits the entire society and not only a privileged few. Finally, Katie Yamasaki earned her MFA in illustration as visual essay in 2003. She is a muralist, teaching artist, and children's book author and illustrator. From schools to prisons, housing occupations to hospitals, Yamasaki sees her art as the vehicle for dialogue, a tool for building platforms for expression and communication. She has painted over 80 murals around the world and is currently working on her 5th published book for children. She is also a faculty member at SVA. I'd also like to introduce you to our moderator tonight, Jamie Kiesling, who received her MA in Critical Theory in the Arts in 2013. She is also the operations manager for SVA Galleries and a faculty member in art history in the honors program at SVA. She is politically active as a member of the Platypus Affiliated Society and has lectured in New York and elsewhere on Marxism, feminism, the history of left politics, and the arts. So please join me in welcoming our incredible alumni panelists tonight. And Jamie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks to everyone for being here tonight. So I will just start it off with some very brief remarks to get us started, and then we'll launch into questions for the panelists. And hopefully, after I pose a few questions, we will have time to open it up to audience Q&A. So the question of the relationship between visual art and politics leans on us most pressingly since the emergence of an avant-garde visual culture in the latter half of the 19th century. This is one that sought to advance ideas and practices within both art and society. At some point between then and now, art making as a form of activism emerged. Such practices situate art in direct relation to social dynamics in order to encourage political change. These political art practices are in opposition to another tendency observable in art's history, that of registering discontent with society by withdrawing from it. The artists and designers here with us tonight are engaged. They address social and political problems through their work in different ways, using different mediums, old and new, material and immaterial. So to start off, I'd like to address a general question to each of the panelists, and that is, how do you see your work in relation to activism? And maybe we can start with Katie and then go down.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I think for my work, I work mostly, as they mentioned, doing murals and children's book, writing and illustrating children's books. And as far as the books go, in terms of activism, I'm mostly working on telling stories that have not been told or need to be kind of included in curriculum. So, for example, a book that came out a couple years ago was about the Japanese internment, and right now it's having a lot of relevance with different teachers and different curriculums because of things like Muslim registration. And prior to that, when I would share that book with students of immigrant families, a lot of children would really resonate with the idea of their parents being taken away, or maybe them being taken away as well. So addressing curriculum, I think, is one way that I try to incorporate activism into my art practice. And then in terms of murals, I work with a lot of different communities that may not have such a platform for dialogue, like incarcerated communities, particularly in the last couple years, large groups of incarcerated women and mothers, and giving them a platform where they can tell their own stories. So the mural becomes kind of like the vehicle. So.
Cool, thank you. So I work at Mount Sinai Hospital, and primarily my work is really understanding patient needs and physicians' needs to address the change that we have currently with the Affordable Care Act. Most of our hospitals have changed the way the payments are received by the hospitals. So we're trying to increase and develop processes and products that will address our patients' lives, especially Medicaid, Medicare patients. So a lot of my work is really just advocating for those patients and understanding the context in which they live within their neighborhoods, and really trying to address their not beyond their healthcare needs, but also the places where they live, and make sure that there is infrastructure and systematic change, not only within the healthcare system as well as within the whole infrastructure that will support them moving forward.
Hi, everyone. So my work in terms of activism, I think sort of really deals with history and looking at the present through the past. It's very research heavy. And, I think that if we don't continue to, be aware of what has come before, it is very difficult to combat or to challenge what's happening now. So history is a big part of the work, and I think people need to be much more aware of what's happened. I think I encounter a lot of art students, or I don't want to say millennials, but people who are younger, who don't know about a lot of sort of social things that have occurred past, say, like the 1980s. I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles. I was around for the LA riots. I was around for Rodney King and the protests that happened in LA during that. And I would talk to classmates, and they would have no knowledge of the LA riots. And they would think that just, what has recently transpired with, the killing of black males this is the beginning of, this happening, and that it's never happened before. And I think it's really important that you know that this has happened before, and that you need to continue to strive for progress. Just because you reach a point of progress doesn't mean it's terminal, like it's over, we've made it. And I think that's pretty clear with what's going on politically now. So I think that's how my work intersects with activism, by trying to educate through the past.
I feel like my work has, even in the past, has been somewhat activist in the sense that it was mostly social commentary. And like I started with, making humorous statements about arbitrary beauty standards in our society and the role of females in our society. And then the more I saw and the more I heard, like, actual politicians making certain commentary about rape and how it's a gift from God if they conceive through rape, and just basically belittling rape, that was just, I think, the point for me where I was like, okay, I need to be a little more obvious, and I took those clips of them saying whatever they said and just strung them all together and let them speak for themselves, So I think things like that just kind of triggered me to create video satires, posters that I hung up in public spaces. Shh, don't tell anyone. And then my most recent work focuses on domestic violence survivors. So, and again, it's like their words, I filmed their mouths speaking about their own personal experiences. And I show that to communities across the country, actually. And I invite women to add to it as I travel the project around. And then I present it to the community, have a panel discussion, kind of like this, and we talk about this epidemic. So, like I said, I feel like my work has progressed from commentary to like more like in your face. So.
I would consider my work to be more reactionary than proactive, because thanks. I react to certain events that are actually important to me, and my posters, I try to make them ambiguous, but of course I take a stand position on them, and you could agree with me or disagree. I guess it's up to the viewer. So.
Great. Thank you. So another question addressed to all of you. Well, some of you incorporate autobiography into your work fairly explicitly, and that informs its political nature based on your past experiences. So I'm wondering if each of you could talk about your personal history and how it shaped you as a political person, and then how these experiences resonate within your practice. And maybe this time we could start with Marlena and come back to Katie.
When I was really young, I saw this tank driving through our village, and my mom told us to get into the house, and we all thought that there's a war going on, but actually they implemented martial law, so just to crush the opposition, right? And then I guess my other thing is that my grandparents and my father we were always watching the news all the time, and I saw my grandfather always looking through the newspaper, and also he would always yell at the TV because he didn't agree with what the politicians were saying. So,
That's funny. I don't know. I guess for me, when I was young, I always noticed things that were like unjust. I actually got the title class complainer in grade school. So I feel like that never stopped. But for me, and also as a female, like working in the film and TV industry, I mean, it's just nonstop. It's so obvious to me, not to others, like just how lopsided it is. So that kind of stuff, and just stuff that I see, like I said, like on TV or on the web or whatever, it's just, kind of influences you to create works to funnel that frustration and anger into something else, and I don't know if I answered the question.
So I guess when I was younger, I spent a great deal of time dealing with these constant conversations with people, or hearing things people would say to me about not being black enough. So when I first started really delving into personal stuff, into my work, that is what my work was about explaining to people that the African American experience is not monolithic, and that it's very diverse, just like any group. Any group can have, it's diverse. And so after, I've spent most of my career sort of exploring that. And now that I have, a family and a daughter, it seems more important to me now to talk about the experience of being a woman and really trying to understand that and showing my daughter that as a male artist, I'm not just going to make work specifically about the male experience, but then I'm going to try to make work to understand the experience of women in this world, whether they be white, black, Asian, it doesn't really matter. So a lot of my work now is about trying to be a part of that conversation, not trying to, say that I speak for women at all, but just trying to help in sort of with that dialogue and sort of changing it.
Yeah, so for me, it started when I finished my undergraduate degree here at SVA as a graphic designer. I worked for a few years in the advertising industry, and I would find myself working like 12, 15 hours days and every weekend, and for things that really didn't have much meaning, and it was just really to get people to consume things that didn't really would add anything to their lives, their personal lives. And so within myself, I always have this desire of really trying to do something that had some social good, and found myself through many years in the conflict of how could I actually create that transition, because when I was at SVA as a graphic design student, a lot of our projects had more of a personal voice, had some sort of drive in terms of activism or other ways. And then once you start working in your day every day, it was just like, okay, what is it that I'm doing? Is it just for a paycheck? So eventually, this is how I started making a transition into doing work that had more meaning, by starting in education tech and eventually transitioning back into healthcare.
We were pretty raised in kind of a social justice atmosphere. My mother's family were Catholic workers, which is the kind of very left side of Catholicism under Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day was the founder. And my father's family the majority of my father's family was sent to the internment camps during World War II. So between those two sides, my parents were both peace activists in the 80s when we were growing up. And where I grew up was north of Detroit in a small town that was kind of based around a GM factory, and in the 80s and early 90s was very anti-Japanese climate. And so being kind of surrounded by that attitude was pretty politicizing from a young age. So.
Thank you. So to kind of bring it to a wider perspective, so in your opinion, do art and design have a specific role to play in the current political climate? And if so, what might that look like? And I'm going to leave it open to whomever wishes to respond first.
I'll go, sure. Why not? I feel like right now, with everything going on, and I don't even have to say, I mean, this is like prime time to use your medium to discuss the issues, you know? Like, I don't know if other people feel like I do about, like, when it's like in here and it's bothering you, and by letting it out through whatever works, video, performance, whatever it is you do. Huh? Hell yeah. Yeah. I thought maybe you couldn't hear me. Just to use that. I think now is really a good time to use that. I don't see how anyone cannot be making commentary right now. I mean, every day I'm bombarded, like my husband puts the news on, I'm always saying turn that off. But it's there, it's in your face, and I think this is the place, you know, to speak in another language, right? About what's happening, what we're feeling, and what we want to change. I don't know. So.
Thanks, Kat.
I'll piggyback off what Kat just said. The piece about speaking in another language. I think one of the powerful pieces of art making at this time is that hopefully we can reach people in a way that the news may not be reaching people, because people want to turn off the news right now.
Right.
And so I think if you can do that in a video or in a film or in a painting or in some kind of image form to hopefully impact the way people feel, and also to give disenfranchised communities and there are going to be so many more disenfranchised communities, as time goes on, give them a platform to communicate through art or through design or anything. I think that now is more important than ever.
Yeah, I think I can speak a little bit about myself. I see activism. I see two different ways of activism. I see this large, very active activists in terms of social media, being in the streets, screaming loud, and we all should be doing. But I also see other ways that are a little more passive in terms of, there's a lot of people working in social good and in third sectors and trying to really do things that are impactful, that are not necessarily as active or as I see as active. So I think definitely, and design plays a big role in that, and especially design thinking nowadays, and really trying to design solutions and products and being mindful of the work that we do and that we put out in the world, and the consequences of it. So yeah, I definitely think design has a big role in activism in general.
So I think I'm going to be the outlier here. I think that art and design have a place in promoting social change. However, I think in today's climate, it does not have as great a place as it did before. And part of that is because this country is so polarized. So we can all sit in the panel, all of us here who are artists or creatives, can make something that we think will speak to the injustices that are going on. But if you are preaching to the choir, it means nothing. So I can make as many posters as I want about Black Lives Matter. I can, go into the streets as much as I want, but if I am not getting into a car on a bus and going into Pennsylvania, going into these red states and trying to talk and get to know the people who are feeling disenfranchised, it means nothing. So I feel it's important that, those who are liberals and those who want social change understand that at this moment, I really think art is a passive form of protest and activism, and that you have to physically get up and go to actually try to change hearts and minds. Because we have done this for a long, thank you. We did this with, under Obama for 8 years, and we all thought that we had achieved change, and we now know that we did not, and that was because we were very passive for a while. And so, let's all get up off our butts.
I agree. However, I do think that maybe a challenge for us as artists, as creators, is to try to find a way to communicate to those people as well. Sure. Maybe don't make it, geared towards your own audience, but how maybe we can think more about how do we reach them? How do we communicate, in the other language to them? So, we can still do both, Like I've gone and protested as well, right?
Yeah.
So you could do that, but maybe, maybe that's the challenge. Maybe we got to find a way to reach the others.
I agree. But I would say that in order for me to know how to make work that will speak to Joe, the coal worker, I need to go talk to Joe, the coal worker.
Well, that could be part of your process.
And that's part of the process.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. In order to really make work that's going to speak to
Yeah.
these individuals, I got to go talk to Joe. I got to go talk to Martha.
Do it.
I got to talk to them. So that's what I'm trying to say. We got to go talk to people.
Marlena, would you like to comment on art's role
I just
today?
think about the TV, like Katie said. I think the TV is now entertainment, nothing else. So, and the whole art is diminishing because we have a president that cares about his golden brick. That's it, nothing else.
Speaking, kind of just to continue to follow up on the question of audiences, right, and how art does and does not reach different audiences, I mean, I want to pose that question to you and how you think about that in your own work. And, specifically, Bruno, you are the artist on this panel whose work is not, specifically visual, right? So you can maybe think about how a visual mentality works in your experience design and how that helps to reach different audiences. And then Katie, I know you work with, a variety of people in your mural work in disenfranchised communities. So maybe you all have something to say on that question.
The question of audiences?
Audiences reaching, maybe you're working with people who are from a very different background than you've experienced, and how you kind of navigate that terrain as an artist.
Yeah. Well, I think, depending on the project, the community that I would be making work with could be really aligned or completely not aligned with me politically or socially or in terms of background. I've done projects in Appalachia where definitely the community was very different than maybe like doing a project here in Brooklyn. But I think a lot of it has to just do with listening, kind of about what we were just talking about. So it's not just kind of talking to, but it's more asking questions and listening and having a space for people to tell their own stories. And so in terms of audience, with a mural, super old form. You've got your geographic audience, the people in the community who see the project, the people who see it going up and kind of engage with it as you're working on it, which is some of the most kind of meaningful dialogue that you might have around the project, because it's just so random that it gets people to stop in the middle of their day and have a conversation, whether it's about like an economy in like a depressed Tennessee community, or a community in East Harlem that's like completely devastated by incarceration. And the act of creating the project creates an audience during the actual physical piece. And then there's the community online, which I'm not that great at engaging with yet. Like, that's still a goal. But I know that some street artists are like amazing online, and they have a whole online world. I aspire to a little bit more of that, but and I think that for different kinds of projects, the community could be the people, or the audiences, the participants, or the audiences, the people who are experiencing it. And you just kind of hope that with the randomness of the project and the kind of opportunity for dialogue, that you're creating a space for people to open up a little bit more and kind of meet people who may have had an experience that is completely different than the one that you're used to or what you might expect.
Yeah, totally. In my work, audiences is pretty much everything. Like, I spend a lot of time really understanding, when you look at our landscape of primary care specifically, which I work with Medicaid, Medicare patients, we have 36 clinics geographically located in different spaces, and I cannot address a patient in East Harlem as well as I address a patient in Queens. They are different lives, they're different people, and I have to understand and listen to them and spend time to them to really be able to address their needs and accompany them. And even, for example, I can speak a little bit of a simple project we have, just generating access to a clinic for a patient. There's just so many different challenges that a patient has in East Harlem that they have it in downtown Brooklyn, for example. So really spending time listening, as you said before, and understanding and just spending time and just also creating understanding and creating empathy to these people, putting yourself in their shoes to really understand what they go through beyond and their lives and their context, not only just asking them questions or listening to what they have to say, but really try to pay attention to how they interact with the people and the networks and the services around them as well. It's really important. We would not be able to be doing the work that we're doing now in our clinics if we weren't really listening to our patients.
Kat, I know you work with different audiences more recently in your practice as well, and then you're reaching specific audiences through the exhibition of this project, Voices. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of like what Bruno was just saying about, and Kate too, Katie. about, listening or whatever. This project specifically is all about giving a literal voice to survivors of domestic violence. So it's them talking, and I'm just kind of like allowing them that space. But when it's installed, it's all about having these communities who, probably know nothing about art or, not part of the art world at all, come in and experience that. So I'm like kind of allowing them to have this one-on-one conversation almost with these women. It's mostly women who are going through this. So, and that's the whole idea of the project. When you walk into the space, all you hear is all these voices, and you don't know what they're saying, and it's all these mouths just, yapping basically. And then until you make that move to get close to one of the monitors, then you start to hear the story. Then you're like, oh. And you hear what these women went through. And a lot of them are really hard to listen to. But the whole idea is, to bring about awareness, to allow these women to have a voice, because they do want to talk about their experiences. They want to talk about it. And to, like you were saying too, Bruno, about empathy, this whole idea, and to let these communities understand that this is happening right there in their own towns, and you probably know someone, or there's some sort of connection between you and someone who's gone through this, and you just don't, they just haven't told you. The likelihood is pretty high. So, I mean, that's what I do with that project.
And Delano and Marlena, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but your work as of late is primarily shown in galleries. And so I wonder how you think about, well, and clearly the reach extends beyond the gallery of your work, but how you think about that form, kind of the traditional fine arts form, in terms of audiences and the reach of your work. Or I also invite you to comment on the relationship between art and audience in general, and what you think the potential is there for conversation.
I guess, in my case, it depends on the audience. I mean, I think masses don't care. Oh, sorry. So I think masses don't care. If you don't care, I mean, it doesn't matter what you're gonna do. You have to have someone to listen to you, or and my stuff is always in the galleries, so it's kind of difficult to have audience like just. My audience are basically fellow designers or people who have followed that kind of stuff. So I wish I could have the budget to put them on the street, but I can't. Budget is a huge thing, so.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're working in the poster form, which
Yeah.
is traditionally like for mass
Yeah.
audiences.
I know, and they actually display it all in galleries all the time. So it's kind of sad, And I mean, I have stuff online, but you just can't I'm designing this poster, and I wanted to see it big. I don't want to see it 2x2.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I
Make it a
mean?
billboard.
Are you gonna pay for that?
No, but there's, you could submit it, I'm serious. There is, a couple of them.
Oh, I did that, but that doesn't work. It works sometimes. You know what I mean?
But maybe you find that there's kind of a general disconnect between what you're putting out there and then what people are able to receive, what a mass audience is able to see.
Maybe.
It sounds like.
I mean, I'm a little lucky right now with the gallery space that I'm in. It's in Harlem. It's off like a pretty normal, I don't want to say normal street, but just like I want to say maybe residential, but it has a great deal of community interaction that happens in the space. So the work is being well received by the community, and the community is really engaged with it. It is in a way hitting its target audience, which is African Americans, and also hitting others as well. If the work were shown in Chelsea, I'm pretty sure it would be very different, and I don't know how I'd feel about that. I probably would not be. I probably wouldn't be that, happy with it. Even if it were shown, like say the work was shown at say like the Studio Museum, that audience is very different than like sort of a small community gallery. Yeah, the next venue that I'm showing at is also in the same situation. It's a sort of a large space that does have like community interaction. And so when the time comes, or should the time come, where I'm showing someplace that does not sort of intersect with the community, I probably will not enjoy the experience, because I know things will be lost. You know, people won't be able to pick up certain things that are discussed in the work, or maybe they see the work simply as just a commodity, as opposed to of a way to educate. And yeah, that's going to probably be pretty crappy.
All right. Last question I will pose to the panelists before we open it up is, how did your time at SVA influence your career, and how did it help get you to where you are now?
Okay.
We'll start with Katie.
Okay. I think I have two answers to that. The second week I was at SVA, I was in the MFA illustration program, was 9/11. And so a couple things were happening then. One was that my grandfather was the chief architect of the World Trade Center. So for our family, it was really weird, because we were, besides just like the total devastation of the city, we were watching the Twin Towers turn into this piece of pro-war propaganda for a war that we were like very much against. And to kind of see that happening made me think really seriously about the type of work that I wanted to be doing. And I also felt like it was a period where the United States was acting like we had a monopoly on war and suffering. And so that was a heavy influence on me. And I think like the idea of creating symbols and who I wanted to make work with and who I wanted to make work for, and the types of stories that I wanted to tell. And the second thing was, we did a project in grad school that was like a postcard project where we were exchanging art with high school students. And that kind of got me thinking a lot about how you can use art as a bridge between communities who are out of contact. So I've done a few projects, one with kids in Cuba and kids in New York City, where they're kind of like exchanging art and paintings based on that. But that kind of led me to a lot of the work I've done for the past several years, which is with incarcerated populations and people on the outside. So one project was where I worked with children whose moms were incarcerated at Rikers, and the kids designed a mural and a message for the moms, and we painted the mural at Rikers at the women's jail. And then the moms designed a mural for the kids and like a message in that. And we painted that mural, the kids painted that mural in East Harlem. So kind of the idea of art as communication. So those two things were probably the biggest influence for me at SVA.
For me, it was initially at the graphic design department. A lot of the projects we worked on were, the instructors always pushed it to be very personal, to have a personal story, to have a personal connection. Different than a lot of other design schools where you'd see students designing, just a CD cover for an artist, So that was, for me, it started there. It was like finding my voice within the work that I was doing. And then eventually, still in the undergraduate program, I had a mentor, Cheryl Heller, who taught me for the last 2 years of my education as SVA undergraduate that, you should only do work that you really care about and you're really passionate about. And that always took to me, and this is where my drive and desire to doing social good work came from. She's now the head of the MFA Design for Social Innovation, which I end up joining years later, and it's kind of how I end up doing now the work that I do.
I did my undergrad. I graduated from Pratt in 2001. So the gap between my undergrad and my graduate is about 13 years. And in that time, I had a practice and I was doing stuff, but didn't really tell people I was an artist, didn't discuss it. If you ran into me on the street, I would tell you what my 9-to-5 job was. Probably wouldn't discuss art with anyone. And SVA was pretty instrumental in helping me learn to start to navigate the art world and to get really comfortable talking about the work that I do and the work I wanted to do. And I really do think that because of the gap, most of my classmates were, right from undergrad, and I don't think were in a great position to really get what you could fully get out of the program. And it was a great experience for me because I was working with people who, like, I knew what I wanted. I knew I wanted to talk about my work. I knew I wanted to meet people. I wanted to learn how to network. And I was able to utilize that in the program. And I felt that the program with Mark Tribe coming into it was very nurturing for artists who wanted to talk about social issues, and really, just really champion those kinds of issues. So for me, it was a positive experience, and yeah, it was a great experience.
I had a similar experience too. I haven't been out of school for a long time, and then coming back. I was the oldest in my class, but that's okay. What I got out of SVA, which I truly loved, I had gone to NYU grad film previously, like years before, and they weren't as flexible. And I found that SVA allowed me to pretty much cross over from photography and video, like whenever I wanted to. They were totally open to it. I had 2 crits, as long as I could explain why, and that was easy. So that really helped me to like play around with, video installation, like for me, that's the melding of the two. And then also Charles Traub, who was the chair, I always hear his voice in the back of my head telling me, you need to go to a place where you're uncomfortable to make good work. So whenever I'm like feeling a little lazy or like scared or whatever, I hear his voice reminding me, you got to get uncomfortable. You got to do the things that don't come so easily, that are not so easy to do. And that's really helped me.
SVA exposes you to a lot of great professionals, a lot of great designers, so that's a great thing about it. And to me was taking a poster class. I took 2 poster classes with Luba Lukova and Rafael Olbinski, but I think Luba Lukova was a lot more influential on my, on my design. And after I graduated, I guess I wasn't doing much. I just got a regular job. And then all of a sudden, I had free time at work. And so I started to browse the internet. And then all of a sudden, I see Luba Lukova's poster. And then it just hit me. Again, because once you have a class with someone, you're not realizing, I think, how good they are. Once you leave, it just, you need that time to, observe. And I left, and it was just and then it led me to posterpage.ch, which it's very socially conscious. So then I just started, since I have free time, I started doing all these posters and just keep doing it, and that's how it just started.
All right, let's open it up to audience questions. Yes, gentlemen.
Considering potentially the kids are meeting the books with prejudices that start at home, or are you assuming that they come from a household that believes Obama changed everything?
That's an interesting question. Well, kids publishing is really, in terms of diversity, children's publishing is hugely problematic, and they're taking steps in the past couple years to fix it, but up until maybe 2010 or something like 90% of main characters in children's books were white, and which is a shocking statistic, but shocking and not shocking. But I think when I'm creating characters, I'm mostly basing them on kids that I know, and I taught in the New York City public schools for about 14 years, and so they're mostly based off of kids and families that I know, and I assume the goodness in children when they're reading the books, and would like to also give the benefit of the doubt to the teachers who may be reading the books with them. And I think that in terms of creating meaningful, kind of well-rounded stories and characters, what I hope is that, it's important if you're Japanese American, if you're Latino, if you're Caucasian, it's important for you to read about all different stories of kids who are having all different kinds of experiences, for people to have a kind of, for kids to grow up with a sense of self-worth that is even. It's important for, like, I've had students in my continuing ed class at SVA who might be from one ethnic background, say East Asian, and they create characters who are all Caucasian in their book. And I say, well, why are all your characters Caucasian? And they say, well, I want it to be a kid who everybody can relate to. I say, well, let's think about that for a minute. So so that's a really important point, and I think that just to expose kids from the earliest reading years, the bulk of the picture book market is like 4 to 6 years old. So at that time, I think kids can look at picture books of kids from all different backgrounds with an open mind. Yeah, thanks.
New York Hat?
So this is more specific to New York City, but oh, certainly. So this is specific to New York City, but the sort of the affordability of studio spaces and venues and apartments has completely plummeted, especially in the past few years. Do you have any advice for artists or for groups of artists to sort of create some breathing room in spaces where they can actually afford and reach out and work within communities, but also just have a place where they can afford to make art? A lot of the discussion today, not a lot, but there's been some discussion at least about the affordability of getting your art out there and being able to even make it, and how you balance that with your 9 to 5 or your regular job. But how is there any advice that you can share with artists here who I'm sure face similar challenges?
I'll just say one quickie thing, and then you have the internet. You've got a whole wide audience of people to reach. So, I mean, start there. I mean, especially if you do like any sort of visual work, I would use it. I didn't have that growing up, so.
I also think my studio just got bought by Storage Cube, but we have we've got like 8 months left. But I think considering alternative spaces that may not be studio spaces or in the art world can be really good. And depending on if you're willing to like partner with some kind of organization, like if you have an interest in say you have an interest in, so I just did a project with this group called Our Children in Queens, and they work with formerly incarcerated moms and their kids, and they have spaces. So there are places to work, and it's not traditional studio space, but I think if you can kind of think outside of the traditional studio space box and think what I need is a desk or a table and a wall, and I'm willing to do some teaching or I'm willing to do some collaborating, that can open up some things, and then you can pitch that to somebody as that might not be listed under Stephanie's list or whatever the studio space thing is, but if you can come up with a partnership that you would be interested in, and then think about what might be some groups who would be good to work with, they might have some space, because it's not that much, it's crazy what people pay for a table and a wall,
Yeah, so I would say get out of New York. No, and this is not to be like, suck it up. That's not at all where I'm going with this. So after I graduated, I did have a studio in Bushwick, and it was really small, and I made 3 works in that space, and when I look back at that work, I can see how much the work suffered, because I was under the belief that you got to be in New York, and if you're not in New York, no one's going to come out to your studio and look at your work. So now I'm out in Newark, New Jersey. And I love it out in Newark, New Jersey. It is inexpensive. You get a lot of space, and I'm very surprised about how many people come out for studio visits to see the work. It's a falsehood. If you make the work, they will come to you to see the work. So go find, something out in Newark, New Jersey, someplace else. It's not really about the location. It's about you, the artist, and the work that you're making. So get out of the city. You know, even you don't have to be in New York. Go to LA. Like as Kat said, you have the internet, so your work will still reach people. Like it can still get out there and reach people. So,
As one bit of background, I represent the New York City Artists Coalition, so it's
Oh.
quite feasible for me to go to LA. But,
I mean, hey, look at it.
yes,
Yeah.
I'm seeking resources in order to more enrich that, and being able to tell them to suck it up and go to Newark is fine. That's a perfectly.
but I wouldn't even broach it as like suck it up. I would say, be a pioneer. Go out there. It's fantastic. It's the most productive I've been. And I can't remember when, and I've only been out there since October. Like I'm telling you. Yeah.
Other thoughts, or should we take another question? Black hat in the back. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi there. First of all, really thank you. Really important. I think we're all here for probably similar reasons. So my question is really about process. A lot of the time, specifically in the visual world, I mean, you start off as an art director if you're in an agency, or you go to creative director, then you eventually want to move into strategy because you start to get to the invisible implications of this, right? Like the human-centric side. And in that empathy and in that mastery of the visual, which we're probably all pretty good at if we're associated with this world, or at least we have an understanding and appreciation, how do we build in a process, and how do you approach, that way of empathy so that we don't just fall into the cliche platitudes of good versus evil? How do we see Donald Trump's humility in his childhood? How do we find the narratives that give us and identify us as being part of the problem, the tendencies and that consistency that we have to ignore the fact that we sit behind our own pulpits of the computer screen, our mediums have been saturated and overwhelmed, and monopoly of time, and the fact that that's the denominator. And if we create more noise and more visuals, what can we do to create more use? How do you build in a process to question those things? Because that process is why I moved into strategy. Lots of visual designers, really fantastic, but there's a lot of worrying about what a logo color looks like, and logos are not really that useful these days. So I really want to question I ask you about your process and how you approach to ensure that it's relevant, it's meaningful, it has the right place. That's my question.
Great. Anyone want to start?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I have a very similar background. I came from the visual world and into the human-centered design space. So, I try to still, I try to spend a lot of time, get out of the computer. I always try to make myself uncomfortable. I try to always find different ways to explore and different ways to see it, which is very important. And then at the end of the day, I still capture all those insights and all of those understandings in some visual format, because that's how my brain works, and I need that still in order to not only understand within myself and further explore the work, but also be able to communicate to other people about the work. But definitely for me, it's just always making myself uncomfortable and never allowing the work to be the same. One of the things that happen when you work in an agency or you come from the visual world is that your work becomes very static because you attach to a desk. And even before, pre-internet, you at least would be able to go to books and look for design books and design libraries and things of that nature. And nowadays, I look at young designers and they spend all day in Pinterest, creating Pinterest boards, and then they basically do the same work that you see over on the Pinterest boards, So definitely I was trying to push yourself to be uncomfortable, to find different ways, to explore different ways of doing work and getting out of the computer for sure. I write a lot. I write more than I actually sketch. I try to write stories. I try to capture stories. I will create stories sometimes that are not necessarily related to what I'm observing, but I kind of try to always output in some sort of writing format. So I'm able to kind of be able to draw a narrative that then I will eventually inform my insights or the design solutions or any interventions that we may further explore.
Any other thoughts?
I think reading literature helps a lot. Because once you read it, you have a lot of ideas flowing in your head. And I think listening to music helps. I think I think most of my stuff, it comes from like when I read. You know what I mean?
And for me, it feels like it's interacting with people. You know, like one of the things that from SVA that made me uncomfortable was this project I did where I rode the 4 train from end to end, back and forth, and approached people and filmed them and asked them questions. So I don't know, I found that I actually do that. Someone brought it up to me. I didn't even realize I was doing it, but a lot of my work has to do with interaction with people, you know, just like having conversations with them and, I don't know.
May I ask something really quick? There's tendency I see in like the signs and all those statements that's like very reductive, and there's like a syntax issue or there's a language barrier where like we're very clever as designers. We say things that are very witty, but because it's reductive, we lose in that final output what we got in the process, which is like we need to communicate messaging that actually speaks and opens up people to the thinking. When you're getting into your process, how can you maintain without being so reductive that maintain the value that you're trying to drive home? Because that reductive, the 4 words on a sign or the poster that you're creating or the messaging in a video can oftentimes be debilitating in its output because there's not the process that you've collected all of this thinking, all these ideas. Like, how do you ensure within that process that it's maintained the integrity?
I don't know, maybe make longer stuff
For me, that
until you're done, you know? I don't know, sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, for me, that's always a challenge because with like a collaborative mural, you have a lot of people, so you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So that could be like 20 participants, their kids, maybe the Department of Corrections or like the Department of Education approving. And you've got so many people, and you're doing interviews. You're having people interview each other because a lot of the time they're going to get more from interviewing one another. They're going to open up more because they have a shared experience that I may not have. So you have all of this stuff. And then also the approval process, at least for me, is collaborative too. So it matters. There's not necessarily an art director. There are non-artists who are approving the mural process. So it could be like the programs director for the Department of Corrections who does not have an art background. Or it could be, like 8 formerly incarcerated women and their social workers. So you kind of get everything in there. And then, so there are compromises that you make visually. So I think a lot of the time with the kind of reductive posters that you're talking about that are very clever, there may not be much compromise that designer's making because they're like, I'm just going to say exactly what I want to say. But then when you get a bunch of other people in, there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So that has its benefits and its drawbacks. Sometimes, like, the most meaningful projects for me are the ones that aesthetically I find like the least agreeable. But it's okay. It's not really about that. Because the people who approve it are the people whose stories are being told. They're really the only ones who know if their story is being told honestly. So.
I think you have to be willing to, you have to be really honest with yourself if you don't want to be sort of, reductive or reductive. When I was doing the last body of work before this, I got into discussing utopian visions that came out of the space race and the civil rights movement. And there were black utopias for like a black state and obvious white utopias for segregation and whatnot. And in order to really make work about what a white utopia and a black utopia was going to look like, I really needed to understand why someone would want this separation. Like, I really needed to know why someone would not want to sit next to me. Someone who was white would not want to sit next to me. And in doing my research, I read this book by Maurice Berger called White Lies. And in it, there's this passage where he talks about, he's a Jewish American, and he's talking to his teacher who is African American, and asks his teacher, why don't you ever explain about your experience with, oppression? And she says, well, maybe you should instead of just thinking about the victim, why don't you also try to understand the motivations of the oppressor? And so it's a hard thing to sit in a room and start to sketch and start to really just embrace all that negativity and to embrace someone thinking of me as as a nigga or as a Jim Crow figure. And you have to be willing to open yourself up to that. If you really want to communicate something other than what you're, you know, I guess preaching to the choir again. And that's a hard thing to do. To get to that place, I mean, it sounds like method acting or something, but it's a hard thing to do. And that you give yourself that access, you know, in your own individual way. But I would say, you know, if you're really going to say design a poster that communicates to, you know, someone who works for, you know, who's a member of like the KKK, you really need to open yourself up to it. You really do. So if you really want to get in there and sort of change their thought process, you need to understand why they are part of that. And that's not anything I think any manual can tell you how to do. I just think it's something you just got to figure out on your own.
Let's squeeze in one more question, and can we go to you there?
Big Mike. You talked a lot about understanding history and how we can learn from it. I was just wondering, in terms of addressing American social problems, do you think there's any place for learning from oppression of minorities in other countries and looking at it on a more international level?
This question for me or?
Anyone?
Okay. Yes. A lot can be learned from looking at what's going on in other countries. Anyone who says that they are for Black Lives Matter or for, you know, civil rights, but is unwilling to support LGBTQ rights or women's rights or, you know, help the refugee crisis, then you're not helping the problem. You know, it's a humanitarian issue, all of these things, you know, and you can't fix one problem and stop. You have to fix them all, otherwise they're just going to come right back. You know, there's always going to be someone out there who is going to find some way of justifying a reason to try to exterminate, you know, 3 million people, or shoot as many black individuals as they can, or justify raping women or disfiguring women, you know. So you have to, it has to be all or nothing. You know, nothing will ever change unless everyone is on the same page. And I don't know if that's possible. You know, there's so many cultural differences, you know, and it's a lot of minds you've got to change. And it seems daunting, but you just press forward and hope that, yeah, you know, we can do this. We can change the world and make everyone equal. But absolutely.
Putting
Yeah.
international solidarity back on the table.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Other thoughts on history and internationalism?
Well, I think, I don't know if this is exactly answering the question, but I think the way I look at things, to not get too overwhelmed, is to start locally, you know, wherever local is for you, start there, you know, and if you can change the hearts and minds and reach, you know, people and bring about awareness just in your little community, you know, you have a higher chance of reaching out to a higher percentage of people in your local community, and then maybe go from there.
I had the first prison I worked in was in Mexico, and I remember it was just a project that randomly came about through residency, and I remember working on this mural with these Mexican women who mostly didn't speak Spanish, they mostly spoke indigenous languages, and the vast majority, over 75% of them, were incarcerated for being on the wrong end of a domestic violence dispute. And I remember working on the project. Their kids were there. If you're under 4 years old, your mom gets incarcerated in Mexico, you go with your mom. And I remember just like having this moment of thinking, like, who gets punished, you know, in our world, you know, and it's like the poor. And these are, like, that was so consistent with, you know, what we see in the United States. And so I think that, like, there are so many parallels to be drawn. but I think that you could replicate that experience across the world in so many different countries. So I think like it was kind of like what Kat was saying, but so it was like taking that experience and then being like, how can I do that locally? How can I do that where we live?